Yeah, that sounds pretty good. So we have one selection from our most recent issue, issue 15 from July, which Rachel selected. And the writer is Evalyn Lee. The name of the poem, I Read a Lot. So yeah, do you want to read the poem? It's not
Yeah,
super
I would
long,
love
right?
to.
I'll
It's not
post it
super
as
long,
well,
and
but
I
we can do the audio, just reading it through. And then,
definitely I would love to read this poem, and I do want
awesome.
to preface my reading by saying that, the first time I read this poem, I was like, wow, it's a real stunner. Um, it reminded me a little bit of um, it reminded me of a poem I'm thinking of right now, We Lived Happily During the War, which people were circulating a lot at the beginning of the war in Ukraine. So I think this poem is really apt to the moment. Okay, I read a lot about war. Why? Blame the journalists. We are living a dead way of seeing. Can I intrude on your interruption to say conflict is an orphan factory? Let's exchange the gift of trespass under a blooming arbor between cascades of empty bird feeders. Can I help you? Oh, it's you. Goodbye. Time passes into history. At the tidal mouth of a river we do not cross as the sun rises on the horizon of our choices. Death brings me here to talk to you. None of us will get out of here alive. The war will leave us where it finds us. Birds will jump, fish fly. A leaf will roll over on its stem to put its back to face the wind. I don't know what to say. Yeah, so part of the things that strike me about this poem is I'm a big fan of the way it's structured. It's structured in couplets. So for listeners, if they want to pull it up, it's really gorgeous. And I especially like where the line breaks are. There's a couple of really pleasing sonic moments here. One of my favorites is none of us will get out of here alive. The war will leave us where it finds us. Birds will jump, fish fly. Um, that's gorgeous. That's a gorgeous little, and I separate it into sort of like a triplet in my head, right? It's like three separate sentences, but it's so pleasing. And it's, it offers a lot of gravity. And so I'm struck by a lot of this. And the idea, right? Can I intrude on your interruption to say conflict is an orphan factory? It's a powerful statement. I think a lot of times in the United States, we don't understand the magnitude of war, of what people in countries that are war torn and conflicted go through. I think this poet really, really hits the nail on the head with it. And I really just thought it was lovely.
Yeah, I think for me, what I liked most about it was I felt like kind of went beyond the maybe like the current event type of um, entry point. It's obviously not specific to any like event, but it has a feel of like um, obviously things that are on people's minds, especially at the time. Um, so it's not super specific into what it's talking about, but I felt like it went beyond just like kind of that surface level, to say something a little bit more about like not even just society, but like more of a more general, transcendent kind of message or commentary or something like that. So that's that was my kind of hook into it.
When I was taking notes on this one, the first thing I wrote down was anti-preachy. I liked that I immediately could feel we're not going to get a lecture. We're not going to get a kind of a diatribe. This is going to be difficult because you can kind of feel the writer, or at least the narrator, struggling with these huge, moral problems. But the first two lines in particular, I read a lot about war. Why? Blame the journalists for living a dead way of seeing. And immediately not only captured my attention, but the blame the journalist line, it feels maybe almost a little too easy, except that for the last 2 years, I've actually been trying to like bone up on studying politics and actually trying to educate myself, which everybody says. But I'll go ahead and get a little political. 2 years ago, the peak of COVID, I had a friend who was wildly leaning right wing. Like he was, grew up with me, good friend, bassist that I play with all the time. And he was going not only from Democrat to Republican, he was like looking over the edge of full QAnon. And so I made it a point to, friendship is most important, but I would like to engage him in conversations about politics. And one of the things that we were able to come together on was figuring out how journalism will create narratives, particularly around war. And we both like Orwell, and we both know that war is something that can be sensationalized, can be turned into clickbait, and therefore, here's all the stuff we know about Ukraine. Here's all the stuff we're not hearing about Syria or various other conflicts that might be equal or greater in importance. So the idea that she kind of launches this suspicion of journalism puts a nice glow on the rest of the poem. So we get to the abstract stuff towards the end. Death brings me here to talk to you. None of us will get out of here alive. I take those more seriously, and the abstraction doesn't seem as highfalutin because of that initial setup, which kind of puts me in the trenches a little bit. So yeah, I loved it. I love the kind of posture that it's coming from, and it gets philosophical without being preachy, and that's pretty tough.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. I think it kind of it gets somewhere, but it kind of in a weird way treads lightly, even though the opening is like kind of so direct, which is kind of a cool balance, I think.
I also really like in this poem, something I was really drawn to in it is like the world continues on without you, right? Humans affect the world and the way that we look at it. We are living a dead way of seeing, right? We're looking at a journalist's interpretation. And to your point, Chris, it's the same as with school shootings, right? I mean, journalists tend to sensationalize school shootings. And there's been a lot of backlash about like, hey, let's not put shooters' names in the media. Let's make sure that we're responsibly reporting this so that it doesn't become a wider spread phenomenon and we make it worse. So there's a lot of responsibility to being a journalist. So I really like the directness of blame the journalists, right? But another thing, going back to like the world will move on, right? Birds will jump, fish fly. A leaf will roll over on its stem to put its back to face the wind. I don't know what to say. Like, I don't know what to say about this. There's a lot of war, but somehow the earth keeps turning. Somehow we're all still here. We're all headed towards death. Death brings me here to talk to you. We're all going to end up in the same place. None of us will get out of here alive. So it's deceptively powerful, right? The first time you read it, it's like, oh, this is about war. And the second time you read it, you're like, well, that's a really simplistic way to view it. And, I think about like a lot of war poems, like W.S. Merwin wrote a lot of poetry about his experiences. And, he had a lot of powerful lines like that. Like, I have no shadow but myself. And that's what I think of. Like, I don't know what to say. I have no shadow but myself. Like, what else is there to say? Maybe what is most important is what exists in what's unsaid here.
There's something kind of sneaky, I think, going on at the very end. The war will leave us where it finds us. Birds will jump, fish fly. I love that line exactly the way you did, Rachel. But there's, of course, birds should be flying and fish should be jumping. And then when you get to the leaf rolling over on stem, puts its back to face the wind, we're getting these deliberate kind of inversion little jujitsu moves. So back to fit. How can you put your back to something that you should be facing? And I'm not sure what to do with it, but I like it. I think there's kind of a sneaky little sidestep coming in at the end there, and it kind of pulls me in a little bit deeper in terms of trying to figure out the juxtaposition factor.
Well, and there's a little bit of that sneakiness in the center too, right? It's like, let's exchange trespasses under a blooming arbor between cascades of empty bird feeders. Can I help you? Oh, it's you. Goodbye. And it's like, what's that about right in the middle? But somehow it works for me. It's almost like the speaker is turning towards me. It feels a little bit like in a workshop I studied with Tess Taylor, and she went over the volta pretty seriously about that turn in a poem where it brings you about. And sometimes I think a really great volta can be when when the poet turns and is almost addressing you. And I don't know if the poet is addressing me or if they're addressing some other in talking about the war. It's not clear to me, but I like that turn here. Can I help you? Oh, it's you. Goodbye. Time passes into history. That's a great couple of lines, and it's a great little turn in this poem. And it builds momentum for me, where like we have these little short stints like, can I help you? Oh, it's you. Goodbye. And then time passes into history at the tidal mouth of a river we do not cross as the sun rises on the horizon of our choices. So it's both pleasing sonically for me to hear it when I read it out loud, and it's also really beautiful on the page. So I really hope our listeners go pull this poem up and read it for themselves and read it out loud to themselves, because it is delicious. Given the subject matter, maybe I'm not supposed to say delicious, but nevertheless it is.
That's fair. I'll allow. Yeah, that's great. I think that nails it for me. Yeah. So Evalyn Lee, I read a lot.